The law relating to organ donation is interesting for lots of reasons, but we pick out just a few to summarise for this part of the course. The first is the relationship between ethics and politics and the degree of pragmatism. So we explored whether or not a discussion of presumed consent as an appropriate model for increasing the number of organs available for donation was a matter of discussing whether or not we were entitled to do what we liked with our own bodies, or whether it was more about public acceptability, and whether it mattered whether the government of the day could be accused of privatising or nationalising, depending on the perspective you think is most important, our bodies, our private parts. And we also looked at the interplay between the theory of healthcare law, what we'd like the rules to be, and the practice of what might happen if we implemented them. And I explained to you my understanding of the thinking of the Organ Donation Task Force and the way it had to consider whether or not the best way to increase the number of organs was to change the way the health service was organised and retrieved organs and got them to the people who needed it, or whether it was best to change the law. So there's a suggestion there that we shouldn't assume that the law is always the best way to do things, and that's a theme that runs through all of our discussions of healthcare law. As lawyers, we shouldn't assume that legal solutions are always the best ones. And finally, the organ donation context invites us to consider who we think the key stakeholders are in our discussions of healthcare law and ethics. And in particular, should we only think about the person who has died and whose body it was, or should we also consider the impact on the family? And we explored the extent to which the rules we have and the practice of clinicians over whether or not they will take organs on the basis of family consent are based on trying to get as close as we can to what the deceased person would have wanted, or do they legitimately respect the anguish and the upset and the distress that family members feel? So we have to decide in part in the organ donation context whether the only thing that matters is the patient, the person whose body we've been dealing with, or whether the people around them are also important. And that raises questions about who we should see the key stakeholders in healthcare law as being.